On April 5, 1982, the Soviet army in Afghanistan launched an operation to destroy the mujahedeen base in the remote settlement of Rabati Jali. Early in the morning, 79 helicopters delivered more than 600 Soviet soldiers who successfully launched the attack on the base. Since the beginning of the Soviet invasion, this was their largest air mobile operation, and General Tabunchikov, who was watching the operation from the Antonov An-30 circle and above, would have been pleased with the spectacle, if not for one thing. The object that the Russians attacked was not the base of the Afghan mujahedeen. In fact, this object was not even located in Afghanistan. The base that the Soviet troops destroyed turned out to be an ordinary asphalt factory in Iran. With the invasion of Afghanistan in December 1979, the Soviets found themselves in a somewhat unusual combat situation. The 40th Army, which became the land forces arm of the Soviet occupational force in Afghanistan, was a strong and well-trained army by Soviet standards. However, it quickly became apparent that the army was not prepared for the type of war it had to fight. Unlike the classic warfare that the Soviet troops were primarily trained for, there was no clear front line in Afghanistan. The Afghan mujahedeen were perfectly aware that they had zero chance in direct confrontations with the Soviets, so they relied heavily on guerrilla tactics. They disrupted supply lines, conducted raids and ambushes, and then quickly withdrew to their hidden bases. Such raids slowly drained the resources of the Soviets, and one of their responses was an attempt to eliminate the problem at its root. They decided to cut off the mujahedeen's access to weapons supplies by targeting their caravans, transit bases and training camps. One such base was located near the abandoned settlement of Rabati Jali, right at the junction of the Afghan, Iranian and Pakistani borders. The first information about the large base of mujahedeen at Rabati Jali was received by Soviet military intelligence in early 1982. According to their agent's report, the base contained warehouses with weapons and ammunition, as well as a large amount of drugs, which the mujahedeen exchanged for weapons from nearby Iran and Pakistan. The base was guarded by roughly 60 people. However, a large group of mujahedeen were regularly stationed at the base, undergoing military training or arriving for new weapons and ammunition. Most interesting for Soviet intelligence, however, was information about 24 wooden crates containing long tubes. Based on the description, this could possibly be Strela portable surface-to-air missiles, presumably delivered from Egypt. The intelligence about the Rabati Jali base was then sent to Moscow to Marshal Sergei Sokolov, who was in charge of Soviet ground forces during the war. In mid-March, Moscow responded with orders to prepare an operation to destroy the base at Rabati Jali. The operation to destroy the base at Rabati Jali was given high importance and received a very promising and set for success codename South. Leadership of the operation was assigned to no less than General Vladimir Vinokurov, deputy commander of the 40th Army. Another fact that showed the importance of the mission was that all the preparations were completed in total secrecy, and the operation was to be carried out using only the Soviet military without any involvement of the Afghan army or Afghan intelligence agency HUD. According to the plan, the operation would start early in the morning of April 5, 1982, with an air strike by 12 Sukhoi Su-17 fighter bombers to suppress the air defenses of the base as well as the outside guard. Immediately after the airstrike, helicopters were to deliver assault regiments, whose task would be to capture all the dominant heights around the base, launch the attack and eliminate the remains of the mujahedeen soldiers inside, destroy the drugs and weapons warehouses, and of course, seize the manpads. To complete all these tasks, the assault groups were given 6 hours, after which they would be evacuated by helicopter. To execute this mission, Soviet command allocated 3 airborne assault regiments, 1 motorized rifle company and a company of Spetsnaz GRU, all in all more than 600 personnel. No less impressive was the aviation group, which consisted of the 280th Separate Helicopter Regiment commanded by Colonel Valery Savchenko. In addition to 61 Mi-8 helicopters in various modifications, Savchenko also received under his command 18 gigantic Mi-6 helicopters from the 335th Regiment. It was decided that the Mi-24 attack helicopter would not be used in the operation due to its limited combat range. The distance to the target was far, and the use of the Mi-24 would require multiple refueling points, which would only magnify the already complicated matter of refueling. For the Mi-8 and Mi-6 helicopters, a transit point was created 47 kilometers from the target, with ground prepared for helicopter landing and refueling. A few days before the operation, some of the Mi-6 helicopters delivered necessary materials as well as huge rubber fabric containers filled with fuel. The preparations for the operation began on March 30, 1982. All the equipment was carefully examined and, if necessary, quickly repaired. The attack Mi-8s received extra armament and ammunition. On the contrary, the troop-carrying Mi-8s were lightened by removing the defensive machine guns, which allowed them to take on board an extra trooper. It was also ordered that red stars and tail numbers on all helicopters must be painted over, an order whose purpose still remains unclear today, since the Soviets were the only power around that had such helicopters. All in all, the aviation group consisted of 79 helicopters and 38 airplanes, which in particular included 8 MiG-23 fighters to provide air cover and an Antonov An-30 carrying General Tabunchikov, who was to oversee the operation from the air. Direct command of the operation was entrusted to the deputy commander of the 40th Army Air Force, Colonel Vladimir Aprelkin, who, according to some accounts, was promised the rank of general and the Order Hero of the USSR if the operation was a success. At dawn on April 4th, the whole helicopter group headed to the transit refueling point. However, the relocation didn't go smoothly due to a sandstorm in the area, which significantly reduced visibility. For safety reasons, the group had to break down into smaller divisions, which significantly delayed the time to get to the refueling point. The last helicopters landed at dusk. The group spent the night manually refueling the helicopters until the morning of April 5th. At 6 a.m., the Mi-9 command helicopter, piloted by Captain Yuri Serebryny with Colonel Aprelkin on board, took off and set a course for the target. The rest of the helicopters were to follow at specific time intervals. At the very same time, the Antonov An-30 with General Tabunchikov took off and headed to the target area. At 6:40 a.m., 2 Sukhoi Su-17s found the Robotyzhny base and marked it with 4 luminous parachute bombs, and in the next 15 minutes, 12 Su-17s struck the Robotyzhny base with bombs and missiles. And it is then that a chain of unforeseen events occurred that, combined with some ridiculous mistakes, made Operation South go south. What happened was that the luminous parachute bombs were dropped roughly 400 meters from the target, which wasn't a big deal for the Su-17 pilots who were familiar with the area. However, by the time the airstrike was completed and the helicopters were approaching the area, the desert wind had carried the parachute bombs way further from the target, right into Iranian territory. The leading command helicopter with Colonel Aprelkin saw the luminous bombs and then headed towards those bombs, leading with them the entire helicopter group. After a short time, Captain Serebryny noted that it looked like they had crossed the border of Afghanistan, but Colonel Aprelkin insisted on continuing the flight. The captain tried to convince the colonel that they were already in Iran, but the colonel gave a direct order and even marked on the map with his finger the place he thought they were. Meanwhile, the helicopter, piloted by Major Nikolai Babenko, reported that they had discovered an asphalt road, which wasn't indicated on their maps. There was a bus peacefully driving down the road whose passengers were not reacting to the overflying helicopters in any way. But strangest of all were the wooden poles along the road, which told the pilots there was no way they were in Afghanistan. Wood was extremely scarce in the Afghan desert and worth its weight in gold. If this was Afghanistan, those poles would have been chopped down long ago. But the moment the pilots were coming to this realization, the group saw a compound ahead of them which matched the description of their target. There were warehouses in the center with guard towers along the sides, and Colonel Aprelkin made the decision to execute the assault operation. Strangely, the absence of any signs of destruction from the preceding airstrike somehow didn't confuse Colonel Aprelkin. The landing started at 7:03 and lasted for 17 minutes. More than 50 Mi-8s landed and stretched across the desert in a line several kilometers wide. Heavy Mi-6 landed nearby and started the refueling process, while assault groups attacked the base with machine guns and mortar fire, gradually destroying the buildings and equipment on the base. For a moment it may have seemed a perfectly planned and executed operation, if not for one thing. The object under attack was not the mujahedeen base at Rabati Jali, but an ordinary asphalt factory in the Iranian city of Harmak. It was pure luck that at the time the factory was still closed and had no workers on site, and the only victims of the mighty Soviet military became two unlucky security guards. Meanwhile, First Lieutenant Ryabashapka from the An-30 with the General Tabunchikov on board had sorted out the situation and immediately contacted the helicopter group.
"You are 12 kilometers away from the target in the Iranian territory. Urgently evacuate the troops and leave the area."
The helicopters received the message but suddenly heard a loud roar of engines. At first they thought this was the MiG-23 from their air cover having fun, but these were Iranian F-4 Phantoms. The Iranians passed over the landed helicopter group on their first approach, however then they turned around and fired two Sidewinder missiles. Neither of them hit the helicopters, with one hitting the ground and exploding, while the second one fell flat and simply broke, becoming a trophy for the Soviet soldiers. At this time a second pair of Phantoms approached the area and started shooting the helicopters with their guns. The Soviet MiGs meanwhile reported that they had missile lock on the Phantoms, but were under strict orders not to engage in the fight by General Tabunchikov, who had rightfully judged that Iranian F-4s shot down over Iran would definitely lead to a huge international scandal. Meanwhile, the Iranians regrouped and continuously watered the helicopters with their guns. Two helicopters were destroyed, while several others received various damage. Fortunately, there were no human casualties, except that one of the helicopter pilots, First Lieutenant Trudov, was slightly wounded. Not long afterwards, an Iranian motorized battalion arrived and pulled up to the Soviet helicopter landing zone. However, by that time, most of the Soviet assault troops had already been evacuated from the area, and the rest of them had to quickly leave Iranian territory at gunpoint. While most of the Soviet troops were evacuated from Iranian territory on the helicopters, some of the regiments had to leave on their own feet. Roughly 3 hours after the landing in Iran, they crossed the border, and then 2 hours later they joined the rest of the troops near the Rabati Jali base. Yeah, they still had to complete their mission. At 12:30 p.m. the assault group completed reconnaissance of the base and contacted the airstrike group. At 2:30 p.m. the Su-17s conducted a second airstrike on the Mujahedeen base, and at 3 p.m. the assault team launched their attack on the base. By 7 p.m. it was all over, with the Rabati Jali base being completely destroyed. However, with the second attack there was no longer an element of surprise. The Mujahedeen managed to safely move out most of the drugs and weapons. The manpads were not found at the base either. By dark, Operation South had ended, however things were still going south. One of the helicopters, while taking off, became disoriented in the blowing sand and dust, turned on its side and collapsed. Only thanks to the flight mechanic, who managed to quickly open the aft hatch, did the crew and soldiers manage to escape the helicopter before it exploded. But that was not the final loss. It turned out that with all this running between Iran and Afghanistan, there might not be enough fuel for the return flight. So Colonel Aprelkin called for a couple Mi-6 fuel tankers to urgently fly from Kandahar. One of those tankers, while on the way to the refueling point, ran into an ambush and was shot down from the ground. The crew managed to land the damaged helicopter and were soon rescued, however they had to destroy their Mi-6 before leaving, adding yet another loss to the toll of Operation South. Interestingly enough, by the time this happened, the Iranian government had already issued a note of protest to the USSR, and the Soviet government made an official apology for the incident. Some accounts state that the Soviet government also issued a lifetime pension to the families of the slain factory guards. As for the Soviet army, Operation South serves as a perfect example that no matter how thoroughly you plan the operation, there is always the possibility that a small accidental event will ruin all your plans. Of course, on top of that was the fact that the Antonov An-30 could have more accurately controlled and guided the helicopter group from above. It was also unforgivable that the entire helicopter group had blindly followed the leading helicopter without conducting navigation themselves and while ignoring the surrounding landmarks. But the main problem, of course, was the blunt ignorance of Colonel Aprelkin, who simply ignored all warnings from his subordinates, like Captain Serebriny, for instance. It is believed that the helicopter's flight recorder impartially recorded their dispute about their current location, which later saved the captain during the investigation. All accounts of this 1982 incident state that Colonel Aprelkin became the one and only culprit of this incident, which led to him losing his high command position and being sent back to the USSR. Which at first made me think of how normal it was. I mean, the high-ranking Soviet officer made a mistake and had to suffer the consequences of his actions. The real Soviet army as it was supposed to be. But then I noted the photo that I have here depicting Aprelkin during one of the Panjshir offensives, which were some of the heaviest battles for the Soviets in that war, and the picture is dated June 1982, meaning it happened after Operation South. A simple search shows that Aprelkin remained in his position in Afghanistan up until 1983. Looks like the success of Operation South didn't affect his position at all. Moreover, in the book The Scorched Sky of Afghanistan by Viktor Markovsky, I found yet another interesting episode with Colonel Aprelkin. In July 1981, roughly 1 year before Operation South, when supporting Soviet troops in a major operation, Aprelkin led a group of helicopters tasked with delivering a group of engineers to mine the road from Pakistan to the Afghan town of Jalalabad. They completed the task, however, on their way back they realized that they had mistakenly crossed the Afghan border and mined the road in Pakistan. The group flew back to remove their mines, but it was too late. They saw some trucks already burning on the Pakistani road. Looks like Aprelkin managed to visit and leave his mark in all the countries neighboring Afghanistan. Except maybe for China, but I have a feeling I just need to dig deeper into his career. To Aprelkin's defense, I may say that navigation in Afghanistan must have been quite challenging due to the lack of landmarks. Funny thing though, even with many landmarks, navigation errors can still occur, like the 1967 incident in Germany when a Soviet MiG-21 pilot, instead of landing at his home base, accidentally landed on a NATO airfield. If you want to learn more about this fascinating episode of the Cold War, check out my upcoming video, which in a few days will be available on my streaming service Nebula. By the way, that's where you can find my other exclusive videos, like the one about the mock fights of the captured F-5 fighter against the MiG-21 and 23, which greatly shocked the Soviet command, or the episode on the Soviets' crazy attempts to mount huge cannons on small fighters, which became known as the recoilless madness of the 30s, as well as other episodes on Soviet aviation history. And more episodes are coming. The reason for this growing number of my videos on Nebula is simple: the strict advertiser-friendly guidelines on YouTube in regards to historical content. Unfortunately, it's very often that my videos get affected by those policies, and the most recent example is my previous video about the crash of the Soviet giant PS-124 aircraft, which was demonetized for I don't know for what, since recently YouTube quit providing the reasons for their decisions. Of course, I may start to adjust my words and videos in full accordance with the guidelines, but that would mean treating my audience like kindergarten children. I don't want to do that, and fortunately, I don't really need to, since I have my streaming service Nebula, which was built by creators like me and where viewers can directly support their favorite creators. On Nebula, creators don't need to worry about any advertiser-friendly guidelines simply because there are no ads or sponsorship messages there. Which is why Nebula houses dozens of unique exclusive projects like Red Atoms by Real Time History, Underexposure by Neo, Battle of Britain by Real Engineering, and Modern Conflicts by Real Life Lore, along with many more projects which otherwise wouldn't be possible since it's too risky to produce them for YouTube. And the number of such exclusive videos is growing every day. Along with access to exceptional educational content, when you sign up for Nebula, you also get free access to Nebula classes, where you can take classes from your favorite creators and learn how to become a successful creator yourself. And best of all, if you sign up by clicking the link in the description, you will receive an insane 40% discount for an annual subscription, which means it will only cost you $250 a month for all this awesome exclusive content from Paper Skies and hundreds of other independent creators. This is the absolute best way to support Paper Skies and enjoy premium content. Thank you so much for watching.